Welcome back to Church House Studios for another episode of In the Studio. Today we're going to talk about microphones, which is really where your recording begins. And to understand microphones, we have to start by understanding a little bit of how sound works. Sound is really pressure from airwaves hitting your eardrum, created by something else. So to carry sound, you have to have air. So if you're looking and thinking about science fiction movies, for say, if you watch a movie and there's a spacecraft and it's taking off and you're in space already and you see the engines fire and you hear all this noise, that's fiction. There's no air in space. Space is a vacuum, so there's nothing to carry the sound. However, if you remember that movie Alien and the tagline, "In space, no one can hear you scream," that's actually true because there is no sound in the vacuum of space. So the first thing you have to understand is that what creates sound is the movement of air created by whatever you're playing, singing, drums, whatever, hitting the microphone in the front. So that's how sound starts. So let's look at microphones in general. There's really three different kinds of microphones we can talk about. The first is called a dynamic mic, and all these different mics are really just different ways that it captures that airwave of sound hitting the microphone. A dynamic mic is using a moving wire coil to capture it, and that gets translated into electronics, goes into your system, and when it comes out the other end, really at a speaker, what you're doing is going backwards on it. So it's taking the speaker, making that push air, and you'll hear the same sound going back. So the dynamic mic has a moving wire coil. Second type of mic you could have is a condenser mic. It has what they call a diaphragm, which is sort of a little piece. It could be metal, it could be cloth. It's really what you're doing is having the air move the diaphragm, and that gets picked up by capacitors, again gets translated into electronic signal, goes through your system, gets recorded, and in the end gets pushed out through a speaker, recreating that sound. Third type of general mic is called a ribbon mic. A ribbon mic is a little piece of metal that's going to catch the waves in the air, again creating electronics there, basically converting it to electronic signal going into your system, coming back out again through the speaker. So those are your three types of mics, and they're different in the way they capture the sound. Dynamic mics with a moving wire coil, condensers with a diaphragm, capacitors, and ribbon with a metal strip, a ribbon strip. So each of those things has their good parts and bad parts. Dynamic mics, and I'll hand one of these first, which is an SM57, they're the sturdiest. They really can take a beating. You can drop them on the ground forever. The moving wire coil is really sturdy. And what these mics do, the dynamic mics, is they put out a pretty large amount of signal when it's going back into the system, so you don't have to add anything to it. If you're looking at condenser mics, and we have a few different types of condenser mics here, condenser mics have the diaphragm that gets hit by the air and moves, creates the signal, and gets transferred into the system. Now, they don't put out as much electronic signal as the dynamic mics do, so what happens with them is you have to run them through what they call phantom power, which adds signal to the microphone and makes it loud enough for the system to record it. Same thing with ribbon mics. They don't put out a lot of power when they're going into the system, so you have to add phantom power to it to give enough signal that the system can pick it up. Now, within those three different types of mics, you're really going to use the dynamic mics for close miking because they take a beating. They can take a lot of air pressure. That's the other thing you have to know about microphones. There's something called SPL, which is the amount of air pressure it's hitting it. A dynamic mic you could put right in front of a speaker. You could put it right on top of a drum, and it's going to be able to take the air pressure. Condenser mics, not necessarily. The diaphragms can be really tender in them, so you don't really want to hit them too hard, and if it gets too much pressure hitting them, you can actually break the microphone. Ribbon mics are even a little more fragile than that, so you got to really watch where you place them compared to the instrument. For instance, you might want to not stick your expensive ribbon mic right on top of a drum that somebody's really nailing, because there'll be too much pressure, and it'll break the little filaments inside it. So within that, there's different categories as you go down through. The next thing you're looking at is the diaphragm size. You could have small, medium, large diaphragms. And the difference is the small diaphragms are usually recorded for high sounds. The mediums can go either high or low or mids. And the large diaphragms will go low and mids. Probably the large diaphragm microphones and the large condenser mics are probably the most familiar kind to most people. If you see pictures of people singing in the mics, they're usually using a condenser with a large diaphragm because it really picks up a good variety of the sound. It has a wide range that it can pick up, and it's the most accurate. So those are the three different things there. Now the other thing that microphones have is what they call a polar pattern. A polar pattern is just saying what part in front of the microphone receives the sound. If you have a microphone like this, it's really called more of a pencil microphone, the polar pattern that's picking up is going to be right in front of it. So it's going to go off to the sides and around the front a little bit. And that would be called a cardioid pattern. That's what most microphones will use. A pattern where it's recording in the front, a little bit to the sides. It's not going to really pick up anything that's behind it. Now we have other patterns that are called super or hypercardioid. Those will be the same thing. It'll pick up in front of the mic, but it'll also pick up a little back behind the mic. Third type of pattern, polar pattern you could have would be an omni pattern. That'd be circular. So that's picking up the sound all around the mic, in front of it and back of it, to the sides of it. You could have a figure 8 polar pattern that's going to pick up stuff. For instance, if you're looking at this mic, if this was a polar pattern, this is a cardioid, a polar pattern would pick up sound in front of it, sound behind it, but it wouldn't pick up anything to the side. Lastly, you could have a shotgun polar pattern, which is going to pick up things directly in front of it. It's not really even going to pick up stuff over to the sides of the mic, just directly in front of it, and most of the time it might pick up a little something behind it. So those are the three different kinds of polar patterns, or really 5 different kinds if you want to split them up that way, that we could have. Now each of these mics is a little different. This would be what they call a small diaphragm size condenser mic. This is a cardioid pattern. It's going to pick up directly in front of the mic, and it's a pencil mic. So this is, if you're trying to get a sound and blip everything out, you want it to focus on just one place, this is the type you want to, kind of mic you want to use. This type of mic will record more around the sides and behind it. So you're going to get a little more off to the sides and behind it. I don't really have a figure 8 mic out here at the time. They record behind it, but that would be more if you had a source in front and a source behind that you're recording at the same time, and you want to record them at the same time, you would use a figure 8 pattern. Some microphones will give you options, and we don't want these microphones rolling off there. This is a small microphone. This is an Octava, and it's a small diaphragm condenser mic, but what it has is you can put different heads on it. So each of these little heads will screw onto this microphone as such. And what they did is each of these heads has a different polar pattern. So this microphone will have a head that's a cardioid pattern. It'll have a head that's a supercardioid that will record in front and a little bit behind. And it'll also have a head in here, like this, that'll record in an omni pattern, which is all the way around the microphone. So the good thing about mics like these is depending on what you're using it for, you can switch it out at any time. And that's sort of a very helpful little thing to have. So those are the basics of microphones. Now, you can buy microphones that range anywhere from inexpensive to ridiculously expensive. And if you're questioning and you want to start recording and you're using a small system, you'd say, well, what do I want to start recording with? What should I get? I've bought a lot of mics. I've been buying them for 20 years, so a lot of the mics I have aren't really manufactured anymore. They're not really created, so I don't want to recommend them. What I would recommend you do is look on the internet and find an article, search for something that says variety of microphones at a reasonable price, or creating your mic closet with a small amount of money. You want to find something that's affordable and yet does the job. One of the favorites is this SM57. These run about $100, and you'll find these in every studio you go to. These are wonderful mics. You can use them directly on drums, directly on guitar amps. You could use them to record vocals if you wanted to. You could record room sound with them if you wanted to. So these are all over the place. If you want to do nice vocals and stuff, you're going to record something with a large diaphragm condenser mic like this. They could be a little more expensive. They could run anywhere from $100 to $500. There's mics that run $5,000. My suggestion, if you want to start recording, I would buy something like a 157 and get 2 large diaphragm condensers. And you can find some that are reasonably priced under $500. What I do with this is I'd buy a pair of them so you can do stereo recording. You want to have a matched pair. So for instance, if you have 2 of these, you could be one at one side of the room, one on the other side of the room. And what that'll do, when you mix them down together and you separate them, it'll give you a stereo feel. And if you want to get a good stereo feel, the best way to do it is to have the microphones match, so they're putting out the same sound. The other thing you want to look for when you're looking at microphones is really the frequencies they pick up. So when you read your microphone, if you're reading specs on them, they're going to tell you a couple things. They're going to tell you what type is it, dynamic, condenser, ribbon. They're going to tell you the diaphragm size, large, medium, small. They're going to tell you the polar patterns that are available on it, and they're also going to tell you the frequencies it picks up the best. So when you're looking for mics to record a bass amplifier, you want to look at the polar patterns, see if it's straight on. You also want to look at what frequencies it picks up, and you want to make sure it picks up low frequencies. It can tail off at the high frequencies if you want. If you're wanting doing vocals, you want something that's really good at mid and highs. Same with guitars, something at mid and highs. So when you get the mics, you can look up online. They'll show you all that information on it, or they should, or you don't want to really buy it from them. So you want to find, again, type of mic you're doing, what it's used for, diaphragm size, the polar pattern, and the frequencies. Those are the best things to have. Right now we're recording with, this is actually a ribbon microphone I just got. Relatively nice and relatively inexpensive. Ribbon mics before this, I just got this recently because most ribbon mics used to start at $1,000 or more. This one starts at like $230, $240. So obviously you get what you pay for in a certain extent. So if you have a $100 mic and a $5,000 mic, will you hear a difference? I would think so if you have decent ears for it. But can you get something in the range of $400 or $500 or even a little less that sounds really good? Absolutely. It depends what you're doing. If you're recording for yourself, if you're making singer-songwriter things or doing your own songs, you don't really need a $5,000 mic. My advice would be buying a couple lower priced mics that are decent mics and just read reviews. The good thing about the internet, there's lots of reviews online and lots of opinions. Although you're going to find on some mics, one person's going to say, wow, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And another person will say, this is the worst mic I ever used. So you got to look through all those type of things. So those are the basics. That's where you're going to start. That's where your sound's going to start, is with your microphones. Hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or anything else you want to know about microphones, send me a comment down along with the video or on the blog, and we'll see if we can answer them for you. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.